Hey everyone, it's another episode of the Orange and Black Insider, and unfortunately, we are going to be talking about another Bengals loss in 2016 this week. I wish we could start kicking off this show with a little bit more positive news, and the Bengals lost once again against the Giants on Monday Night Football in front of the nation. It was only by 1 point, but still a heartbreaker nonetheless. We're going to break that down. We're going to talk about a number of different topics and answer some fan questions. So fire those at us on Twitter at BengalsOBI, or you can join us in our YouTube chat and, talk to us there and leave a question if you have some there. We already have some queued up, but thanks for tuning in. Thanks for downloading the show. We appreciate all the support. I'm joined by my usual co-hosts and my brothers in Bengals arms, Scott Schulte. Let's skip the Bengals for just a brief second. You're our resident fantasy expert here. How's your fantasy team doing?
I did not play Connor this week, so I managed to win.
There you go.
Actually,
yep.
I think in our Bengals league, I'm still in first place.
By a long shot.
Still kicking butt. So I think after last week, I locked the first playoff spot. Or a playoff spot. First team to lock a playoff spot. His team is loaded.
He has Demaryius Thomas on the bench this week, and it's not even like he's benching him.
The thing is, I wish I had some of those players in my league with all the money involved.
That's true.
Well, that's at least you can hang your hat on that, Scott. Even though the Bengals have not been playing such great football of late. I'm also joined by Connor Howe, my West Coast brother. Connor, I know you're kind of fighting a little bit of a cold bug, you told me, but how's everything else going?
Things are good. I will say in the fantasy realm, Scott has been fortunate to not have to deal with injuries to Eddie Lacy, Jamal Charles, and Doug Martin, and Danny Woodhead, and like every single player he drafted. So he's got that going for him.
Should we cue up the world's smallest violin for you, Connor?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's fancy. I don't really care, but it is what it is.
Well, it's good to have you guys here. We're gonna try and find some positives and some moments of levity this week as the Bengals fall to 3-5-1 to the Giants, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of good out of that game, a lot of bad out of that game. We're going to start breaking it down. Scott, you have a couple of points that you want to talk about, and it sounds like maybe even vent about with what we saw on Monday night.
Yeah, I just have a couple quick things with that are just kind of summaries. And unfortunately, what we saw on Monday night was pretty much what we've seen all season. One of the big things is just so many lost chances and not finishing. In the past, it's been Nugent missing kicks, or it's been this or that happening. This week, it was 2 of 11 on third downs. Just, for a professional NFL team, that's just a horrible statistic. And it's not like they're playing against, the 85 Bears or the teams of recent memory when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or Ravens were going to the Super Bowl based on their defense. I mean, the Giants aren't a horrible defense, but they're not exactly, lighting it up on fire. They're not the Seahawks of a couple years ago. They're a team you should be able to score on. I think they give up like 22 points a game or something. So and to only go 2 of 11, just totally frustrating. And then of course you have the 9 penalties versus the 2 penalties for the Giants. And probably the one that really was the Drake Kirkpatrick interception, which, awesome, great play by him, jumping in front of the ball, returning it, gets it all the way down the 7-yard line, first and goal on the 7, second and goal on the 7, third and goal on the 7, fourth and goal on the 7, just absolutely nothing. And I kind of had the same thought when Eifert had that big 71-yard reception. Just, man, I hope he scores, because I just don't have any faith in them punching it in if he doesn't. And I was very happy to see they were able to get that touchdown after Eifert's long catch. But that's kind of been the frustration with them all season, is they tend to get there. They just can't seem to get the ball in.
You look at the Alex Erickson return. He returned it for, 70-something yards, and they got a field goal out of that.
Yeah. And they just – or the Dallas game when they had 4th and goal on, the 1-inch line, and they can't punch it in. It's just all season long. That's been their story. They – get it, and we saw it again last night in prime time, or not last night, a couple nights ago in prime time. They just can't, for whatever reason, they just can't finish this year.
And that's been kind of a theme, not only not finishing, but the lack of execution in the red zone, which is especially startling now that you have Tyler Eifert back and healthy. The lack of execution in the red zone, the lack of execution on third down, which to me was mind-boggling. And to your point, Scott, I noted, I think it was about 3 different big plays. You guys both kind of mentioned it, and that's for me, that's the story of this game. And I put it in my the good, the bad, and the ugly post on Cincy Jungle. So go check that out if you can. There were basically 3 major points where the team could have really put together some things and really take a hold of that game, and they didn't. They only scored 3 points off of the 2 Manning interceptions. Granted, one was kind of a deep ball back in their own territory. Georgia Loka picked it off, but turnover is a turnover, and that's a momentum changer. You got to score points off of that. And then they only scored 3 more on Erickson's punt return that gave them field position about at their own 38 or 40-yard line. 6 points off of those 3 plays is inexcusable, and that points both to execution on the offensive line, execution by the players, but poor play calling also by Ken Zampese. And that's one of my major takeaways in this loss. And it especially, when you lose a game 21-20 by 1 point, it especially rings true for me as I look at kind of how things played out on Monday. Connor, your thoughts, your frustrations, some things that you maybe noted on Monday night, and where does the team go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a frustrating game. Like Scott said, third downs were a huge issue. They went 0 for 7 on the first 7. 2 of those could have been first downs, but both of them got negated by penalties. We saw the really long Andy Dalton escape out of that, crazy. He somehow escaped out of a giant pile that looked like a huddle. But Gio Bernard holding penalty negated that. And I'm pretty sure they were in pretty good field position at that point, and they ended up punting. And I think the most telling stat of the entire night, which hasn't really been spoken of that much, so I'll throw it out at you guys. The Bengals on Monday night had 2 drives that went for more than 5 plays. One of them went for 6 plays, which ended up in a punt. That was the last drive of the game. And then one of them went for 7 plays and ended up in a field goal after the Bengals got the ball on their own 39-yard line. So, I mean, that's just... I was talking about it with Anthony earlier. The Bengals got every single chance to win this game. It looked like the Giants dropped 30,000 balls on Monday night. And if they didn't drop it, Eli threw a really bad pass to the flat. I mean, every single break that could have gone the Bengals' way went their way. As soon as Andy Dalton throws a back-breaking interception, what do you know, 9 seconds later, Eli Manning lobs one to George Iloka for an easy pick. I mean, all the Bengals have to do late in the game is stop Rashad Jennings from running for 6 yards, and they can't do that, even though the Giants have by far the worst running attack in the entire NFL. There's really no excuse to be made. I mean, it was just it's Andy Benoit from the MMQB, which is like an entity of Sports Illustrated, put it well today when a fan asked him what's been the Bengals' issues, and he just said it's they haven't executed crisply on the offensive line or on defense, and I still can't say, is it coaching, is it players, what is it? Something's wrong, and there have been times when Zampese's been good. We've seen he's bringing back those formations, which, by the way, just come up with a name on those formations. This week John Gruden called it the Star Wars formation. Last week, someone else called it the Chaos formation. I've heard Fisher Price. All these, just come up with a name. But for play was beautiful. Just found him deep downfield for an easy play, exploited linebacker in one-on-one coverage against one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Bengals offense, but then, like he hinted at, I mean, there have been times where the play calling on both offense and defense has just been so frustrating. With, Paul Gunther insists on running these double A gap blitzes, but he's put linebackers in a position where they're going to to guys like Beckham, Sterling Shepard on offense. When Ken Zampese shows, or I don't know if it's Zampese, Lewis, whoever it is, when there's no urgency on the last drive, and bailed out by a Hail Mary to A.J. Green in the Browns game. But we see it in the Giants game. They could have had potentially more points instead of coming up empty-handed in another failed drive. I mean, just things like that really make you want to wonder what is wrong with this team. And I think we're all very quick to try to assume and try to understand what we think is wrong. But at the end of the day, it's more than just a face value one thing is wrong. There's a clear, there are clear like issues that are far beyond just surface value of, this is one thing that's wrong, that firing Marvin Lewis is all of a sudden going to turn around the franchise, or benching Domata Peko is all of a sudden going to make the Bengals the best run stuffing D in the entire NFL. There has to be a solution rather than just cutting someone or getting rid of one thing. There's no such thing as addition by elimination unless you add after you eliminate.
It's all fair points, and I know I look at a couple of things as kind of a microcosm that occurred on the Monday night game that are kind of a microcosm of the Bengals 2016 year. One of them is, again, the offensive line was pretty poor the entire night. You especially look at the end of the game, crunch time, obvious pass situations, obviously, so the Giants are going to be probably teeing off on some things. But there was a shot, I believe it went up on a different post I put up on Cincy Jungle. It's of Dalton getting sacked at the end of the game. There are 4 Giants defenders on him. One guy's grabbing his ankle. Three guys are basically grabbing different parts of his body and bringing him to the ground. You have Cedric Abwehi on his back. You have Kevin Zeitler on his butt. You have Clint Bowling on all fours. Andrew Whitworth is looking back at the quarterback, way away from the play. And Russell Bodine is kind of doing the same thing. So they did not engage any one of those guys well enough, and all 4 of their rushers got to Andy Dalton at the end of the game. That's inexcusable. The other thing, and I think this points to the entire issues of this year, you don't see the team I don't really know how to word this correctly, but they're not all doing things well at the same time. And what I mean by that is there are times that the offense makes a play and does things well, but the defense lets up a number of plays. We saw that in the tie against the Redskins a couple of weeks ago. And then this week, the defense keeps stepping up. The offense doesn't completely take advantage by scoring a lot of points. And then at the end of the game, when you finally are like, you know what, the defense is going to step up and get the ball back, they don't do it. So it's just things not congealing, things not coming together right, and the team playing well as an entire unit this year. And a lot of reasons could be pointed to there, but that's one of the things that they did so well last year, and they got to 12-4 into the playoffs. So that to me is kind of a little bit of what I saw and I noticed this week on Monday Night Football. So that being said, much, Connor alluded to it, much has been made this week of fire Marvin Lewis. We got to get rid of him and all of that. There's merit to that thought. There's merit to that argument, especially with a disappointing 3-5-1 start. There's two things we're going to talk about with Marvin Lewis here, because that is obviously a hot topic amongst Bengals fans. I'm going to start off with the primetime thing. And a lot of fans don't want to recognize that the primetime thing is a real thing. They point to, well, of course you're going to be playing better teams on primetime. Sometimes you're going to be playing those good teams on the road. Fine. But you look at Marvin Lewis in these big games and off of buys, and those are two major things. For all the things that Colin Cowherd bashes on with the Bengals, he has publicly said many times that that's how he gauges coaches, both in college and pro football. How do you do off of buys with extended preparation, and how do you do in these big games? Well, again, this game against the Giants on Monday night was an encapsulation of both of those items. It was on prime time, it was on the road, and it was off of a bye. The Bengals had 2 weeks to prepare for this game, and they still lost. So you look at Marvin Lewis in prime time. I believe his record is at 6-24. That's awfully poor. You look at those games in the Andy Dalton era, they're 3-12, and these are including the playoffs as well. And then you look at Marvin Lewis off of buys, and you go, he's 5-8-1. Those aren't good stats for a guy that has rebuilt this team and has built a winner in a competitive team. But that's still the stumbling block for this team. Is it preparation? Is it overall roster talent? Is it shrinking in all of the limelight? Is it all of the above? I don't know. But at some point, for me, that has to come into question with Marvin Lewis and his leadership of this team. This team is not getting it done in the big games, the games where they need to win and take the next step, those playoff games. They're just not getting it done. And he's had 14 years to do it. I mean, I mentioned the Dalton primetime stats. It's not just Andy Dalton at the helm. It's also with Carson Palmer. Same thing. So there's one constant with these issues, and it's Marvin Lewis. So that being said, Scott, you have some points you want to make about the potential of firing Marvin Lewis. Is that a good idea? Isn't a good idea? What do you think?
Well, I think it's obviously something that's debatable, which is why it's a good topic to bring up, because there probably isn't a right answer. I think arguments can be made either way for keeping him or getting rid of him. I think one thing we've seen, because he's been there so long, there are definite traits and definite things you can see about his attributes, kind of what he brings, doesn't bring to the team, as far as why you'd want to keep him or get rid of him. So I have a couple points why I think the team might be better served going in a different direction that I think have worked against the team. The first one is he has this very strong tendency of hanging on to mediocre players too long, favoring a veteran presence over better younger players as far as playing time, making a roster. That's something he's said before. It's kind of everyone who follows the team kind of knows that's the direction they go. And there's, countless examples, even going all the way back to the whole debacle of picking Nate Livings over Evan Mathis, or drafting Carlos Dunlap, having him fall to them in the draft, and then sitting him for 3 years behind Robert Gathers. Yep. And over that span, I think Dunlap as a backup who was getting like a third the snaps out-sack Gathers, like 20-7 or 20-6 or some, totally absurd. Everyone watching the games is like, why isn't this guy starting? And it's, well, he doesn't practice right. He doesn't, silly stuff. And
we saw
how much better could
too with on Monday with Wallace Gilberry comes into the game, replaces Margus Hunt, who obviously hasn't been playing great as of recently, but Wallace Gilberry comes in, and the one play I notice him is, of course, the 25-yard run by Rashad Jennings when his dude just completely negates him from the play and Jennings blows by him. And Hunt wouldn't have, for as poorly as Hunt, Hunt hasn't been bad, but he hasn't had any of those plays this entire year. And you bring in Gilbert, and what do you know? Like, as soon as he comes in, you see one of those plays.
And that's what we see. Like we've talked about it before on the podcast, Mike Nugent. He's been a below-average kicker ever since his first year here. They never bring in true competition for him. It's usually guys that weren't that good in college who really don't have a shot in the NFL. John Brown, Tom Oberski, people like that. Yep. He's our guy. It doesn't matter if he misses every field goal. We saw that the Vikings recently just cut Blair Walsh. He's been much better over the last 5 years than Nugent has. But like, hey, we didn't make a change, and we're doing it. And something like D'Amato Pecco, granted they haven't had a whole lot to replace him with, but they continue to give him a ton of snaps. Or the linebackers, the Ray Maluga, Vincent Ray over Dawson and Vigil. Not that Dawson and Vigil are not necessarily better, but we're not even given a chance to see if they're better. Or things like Tyler Reifert, great player. They drafted him his rookie year. At the end of his season, they're like, I guess we underutilized him. Maybe we shouldn't have thrown the ball more. Well, yeah, that's why you drafted the guy.
Right.
Or, they do that with like Drake Kirkpatrick. He sat for 3 years. And, Denard, they draft these guys with no intention of sitting or, just to sit them. And so there's a lot of very questionable decisions like that I think have really hampered the team. And that gets me to the second point, which is the drafts. I know a lot has been said about how the Bengals have a great system. They do a good job drafting. They get these guys. They get good values. And if you look at the core of the playoff run, the teams that have made the playoffs those 5 straight years, the best players that were drafted by Cincinnati, their own teams, are probably going to be Andy Dalton, A.J. Green, Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins. As far as drafted players, all of them came in 2010, 2011. They got Dunlap and Atkins in 2010, Green and Dalton in 2011. Since then,
and Bowling too.
Yeah, and Bowling would be another one, the one they got in 11 in the 4th round. So you have those that great core, and you draft these great guys, and that's wonderful. But since then, 2012, you draft Drake Kirkpatrick, you sit him for 3 years. Zeitler's been decent, but they also drafted Still and Sanu kind of early. Still was out of the league.
Too.
Yeah. Sanu he was never really great. 2013, they did get Eifert correct. I'll give him credit for that. But your next 2 picks, Hunt has really struggled. And then Sean Williams has definitely had some issues, especially in coverage. I'll admit, I'm not a big fan of him when it comes to passing plays. The next year, Denard really can't see the field. Whenever he does, he tends to always be a step behind, or, just not providing that shutdown corner that you would hope you'd get in the first round, and not just kind of a slot guy. After him, Will Clark hasn't done anything. Russell Bodine, I think we've beaten him to death on here. The next year, top 2 pick, Cedric Ogbuehi. I mean, he's struggled mightily at right tackle. Jake Fisher hasn't been any better. Dawson and Hardison can't see the field. So you just have this litany of players since that 10-11 draft who have just really, had issues, and they just haven't lived up to, I guess, average expectations. And so I think he's getting a lot of mileage off of 2 really good drafts. And even you go to the drafts before that, you have guys like, Keith Rivers in the first round, and Jerome Simpson. They just had a lot. They've just haven't had the drafts equal to what he seems to get credit for. And I know a lot of people will defend him because he does a great job drafting, but I think a lot of it just comes to 2 solid drafts that, it's been half a decade. We don't have that track record of, this is a great drafting team. And if they do draft the right guys, they don't play them. So I'd say for those reasons, I think it's time possibly for the team to look beyond Marvin, because, you know what you're going to get. We know what he can do. We know what he can't do. And I think the things he can't do have been things that have limited the team or kept them from doing better than they have done.
I love a couple of points you brought up there, Scott. One of which is PJ Dawson. And I get it. I mean, you want to send a message to a young player, and maybe he's late to meetings and he's sleeping in, or he's not practicing as hard as you would like, but very productive college player. You spent a 3rd-round pick on him. You see Carlos Dansby struggling. You see Vinny Ray have his ups and downs out there. Maybe he's not the fastest guy, but he at TCU, he created a lot of turnovers, and that's something that the linebacker group is not doing right now. And might he be an upgrade? I don't know. Might he be a total downgrade, and that's why he's currently on the practice squad? I don't know. But at some point, you got to let some of these guys sink or swim, to your point, Scott. And that kind of leads me to another point. And Connor, I want to get your thoughts too, because I think you have a little bit of a different mindset than Scott with the Marvin Lewis thing. But when you look at, for years, we've heard about the Bengals and their draft philosophy, and how they keep acing the draft and all of these things. And that's great. I mean, it really is encouraging from a fan perspective as you go into a season. But you're starting to see these guys finally, some of these guys are either not playing or they're finally getting some playing time, and they're not playing very well. So you have Darquez Denard struggling. Josh Shaw has had some ups and downs already this year. Sean Williams, you mentioned, Scott. I mean, there's guys that are getting time and they're not really playing that well. Well, there's another team that operates under a very similar type of mantra, I guess, and that's the Green Bay Packers. And now all of a sudden you see them, a team that only relies on the draft, is not aggressive in free agency, is not aggressive in terms of trading up into a draft or making player trades like the Bengals. And now you see them struggling when injuries hit, when these young guys are started to count on, and maybe they're not quite the players that you think they are when you drafted them. This starts to call into question the team philosophy of basically only relying on the draft. Again, Carlos Dansby, the Bengals had 2 major outside signings this year, and both were for minimum money, and Carlos Dansby and Brandon LaFell. Brandon LaFell does now co-lead the team in touchdown receptions, but again, last night, one catch for, I think, 9 yards. That's not getting it done. And obviously some of these sacks that we're talking about with the offensive line might have to do with the fact that these guys aren't always getting open, and Dalton has to hang on to the ball and go through his progression. So there's just a multitude of issues. I think the culture, I don't think the Bengals need to go and get the top tier free agents, but I think they need to be a little aggressive. And if there's a guy in the draft that they like, best player available does work quite often. However, if you need a spot and you need an athletic linebacker, you want to add another pass rusher, maybe you move up and sacrifice a pick and get that guy instead of getting maybe another athletic corner yet again in the first round, or something like the 2 offensive tackles in 2015. Maybe you just do. You have a different operation as a team, and we've heard that now this is the mantra that's been built with Marvin Lewis, Duke Tobin, and Katie Blackburn, not so much Mike Brown. So the Bengals are a conservative franchise in their history. The Packers have been as well, but you're starting to see both those teams struggle based on them solely relying on the draft and not really doing much at all in free agency, trades, trading up in the draft, things like that. So that's something I've kind of been thinking about as this team continues to struggle. But that being said, Connor, you might have a little bit of a different viewpoint from Scott in terms of if it's a good idea to get rid of Marvin Lewis and move on. Now, I don't think we're all talking about firing Marvin Lewis mid-season. I don't think that's.
Yeah, that's not.
I don't think that's what we're talking about. Yeah, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking maybe see how this season plays out, because we don't want to be too knee-jerk reaction. We've seen this team make some late season pushes under Marvin Lewis after slow starts. But if the team ends up struggling and either has a losing record or a mediocre record, what are your thoughts on the status of Lewis?
I think you guys made a lot of very good points, and I don't agree with everything. I strongly disagree with some. I disagree with some. I agree with some. I strongly agree with some. So I'll start off with, I think the one that really caught my attention was the whole, LaFell's production's been down a few games. I kind of have this feeling that every time the Bengals start to lose, that fans really just kind of continue to repeat the same narratives. And I think a lot of that has to do, honestly, with the primetime, which, by the way, the primetime argument, I think, for so long I'd felt a certain way that, the primetime is just coincidence, they're playing good teams, whatever it might be. I think it has some merit. I think that, there's certain games that the team needs to be ready for. The bye week, you have so much time to prepare. The primetime game is just one of those games where you have a chance to really define your identity in front of the nation as a team. And I think part of the reason why the Bengals have had such a strange reputation, as we all know that people want to chop Lewis's head off as soon as the Bengals lose a game, that people want to throw Dalton under the bus as soon as he throws a pick. All these different perceptions, the Bengals are perennial chokers. That comes from the fact that they can't win games in primetime. That's the perception of the nation of this team, is because it stems from the fact that Marvin Lewis can't win in primetime. I think that has merit. The one thing I disagree with, I don't think you're completely wrong on it. I just think that with the whole argument with the receivers, LaFell not being, I can't really say I'm on board with the whole free agency approach. I think the Bengals have done a good job with it. I think there's certain scenarios where they definitely need to be better. For example, though LaFell, I think, was a great signing, and I think he's a quality number 2 receiver in today's NFL. I mean, he's really a middle tier number 2 wide receiver, I think, in the grand scheme of the NFL, with plenty of high round young draft picks. Devin Funchess comes to mind. Michael Floyd, who has been really underachieving in Arizona. Think of all the bad teams who don't have good receivers, San Francisco, or all these different teams. He hasn't been productive in every single game, but I mean, he's the same kind of player as Marvin Jones. They're going to have big games every now and then, but Marvin Jones, even as a receiver, I think his impact has been greatly exaggerated once he left the team. You see in Detroit now, I mean, he was the league leader in receiving yards after a couple of weeks, and he's had several very outings where he just wasn't even on the field. He played, but he had, I think, 10 yards in a game either last week or the week before. And so with that, I think the free agency approach, don't necessarily agree with. That being said, Monday night was really the first time, I think, as someone who's followed this team, that I've been this frustrated with Marvin Lewis. It's just like you guys said, there's an issue with drafting and developing, and with Scott, I think the year 2011-2012 is a little harsh. I think 2011, 2012, and 2010 too. 2010 was the year with Geno Atkins and I think Dunlap was 2010.
Yeah, they were both
It was
2010. Yeah.
basically, yeah, it was 2010, 2011, and 2012. And Scott, I don't think gave enough credit to the class of 2012. Zeitler's been very good. Kirkpatrick has really come into his own. He's obviously still an inconsistent player, but we've seen the upside with him. I mean, his pick, I everything inside of me wanted to be like, oh, that was just a bad pass by Eli. But that was a very good pick by Dre. That's really the best interception he's had of his career, and he's
Agreed.
obviously had
Agreed.
a lot of good picks. But that one was really
It was a very athletic play. Very
he
athletic
read
play.
him and made the play, and that was very encouraging to watch in a year where he's been very good at times. We saw the Steelers game. So that being said, and you have Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, George Iloka. They hit a ton on that class, and it obviously took time for them to develop. But that's been the issue with the Bengals. Has been developing players, and I think that when you talk about that, I can't blame it all on Marvin Lewis. Especially have so many new coaches, an entire new staff on defense with Jim Haslett at linebackers coach, whoever their defensive line coach is, Kevin Coyle in the secondary. There's so many different coaches, and developing players isn't. It's not like Marvin Lewis is the only coach on the field. And having worked for a team, I can say that the head coach is only one of all these coaches. It's not like he's the guy who is on a pedestal with a microphone calling out all these things, and all the other coaches are standing there listening to him. The position coaches are really the guys who are interacting with the players the most out of all these coaches. And so, not that, nothing's on Marvin Lewis, it's all on the position coaches. But I think the Bengals need a chance. And this is all devil's advocate. I said earlier that, Marvin Lewis, firing him isn't just going to make the team better. And what I mean by that isn't that, the team can't get better if they fire him. I think that's a legitimate scenario the Bengals need to consider in the offseason if things continue to go down this road. What I mean by that is that they need a solution, and you need a coach who you think can help this team win very quickly. And there aren't that many guys in the NFL. Not that there aren't any, but you need some of those guys. But back to my point, it's just that I can't blame the whole drafting and developing all on Lewis. There's plenty of coaches that interact with players. We don't know if Marvin's. I mean, he's obviously very involved with the front office, but none of us really know who's making the picks in the Bengals draft room, and it's a combination. I'm guessing of. I would still guess that Duke Tobin probably has more say in the personnel, but the biggest flaw with them has been it's just a matter of scheme and their concepts and the fact that their whole defense is predicated on not changing, and that's not wrong. It worked last year.
Isn't that coaching? Isn't that coaching?
That's part of it. Yeah, but we saw last year Paul Gunther's scheme worked very well. The Bengals had a top 3 scoring defense in the NFL, and the personnel changes, and it's not like you can't blame it all on the players. Obviously, Gunther needs to adapt, but I can't fault him for trusting his guys and hoping they play. But at some point, I have to blame the front office for, and I've hit this point home a million times, is that the Bengals don't have the linebacker personnel they need to run the defensive scheme they're running. And on offense, they need to run the ball more. They didn't see them run the ball on Sunday or on Monday against the Giants, and every single game it's not like the Giants got they score on their first drive, but they were never ahead by, I believe, more than a score. And so the Bengals had several opportunities to run, but they didn't run, and they didn't put Jeremy Hill in. I don't know if that was an injury. I think he looked like he got hit by Gio Bernard on the sidelines on one play, but even with Gio, you can still run the ball with Gio. I mean, they're not running it. They're playing a vanilla D, which has worked, but it's not working for them this year, and you have to do something at the end of the day. I mean, that's what, like you're saying, Anthony, that's what coaching is you have to adapt. That's why, for me, like the changing in coaching, we saw Andy Reid leave Philadelphia after such a long time. He goes to Kansas City, and they still haven't. I think they won a playoff game against Houston last year, but I wouldn't call that success really. It's not a Super Bowl. But we saw Andy Reid. He got a fresh start in Kansas City, and things have been going better for him. His teams have been playing very well. The Chiefs are the number 1 seed, I believe, in the AFC right now. And Alex Smith is playing like a good quarterback, which, I mean, that's good coaching. I think, honestly, Marvin Lewis needs a fresh start more than anything. I mean, the Bengals are a good team, and I think that I don't think they should just like we were all saying, I don't think it's just something that it's still just something that I'm considering at this point. I don't know if I still am sold on the fact that the Bengals need to sell, or I mean, get rid of Marvin Lewis. But Marvin Lewis is a good head coach for what he is, and I think that a fresh start would help him just as much as a fresh start would help the Bengals. Andy Reid turned his career back around in Kansas City, and they have a contender there. Marvin Lewis turned around the Bengals. He transformed the franchise into what it is right now, to the point where fans are frustrated with a 3-5-1 start, which is still more wins than the team was getting before Lewis was even in with Cincinnati. So I like Marvin Lewis as a guy. I understand why a lot of people don't. I would love to see him, turn around a team like the Niners or some other team that needs a head coach to turn around ship for them. It'd be exciting to watch, or the Jags, or Marvin Lewis of the Jags. I would love to see. I think that'd be a perfect match for him. But it's becoming harder and harder and harder to say that the Bengals shouldn't fire Lewis. And I'll say this one thing to cap it off. The devil's advocate scenario is you have Dalton, you have Green, like we're talking about, these draft classes, they're all still very young. We saw the Broncos got rid of, John Fox. They hired Gary Kubiak and win the Super Bowl in Kubiak's first year. We saw in 2002, the Bucs fired him. They hire John Gruden and they win the Super Bowl in the first year. Tanking is not a proven formula. We've seen so many teams tank and not get anything out of it. The Chiefs got Eric Fisher with the first overall pick in 2013. Haven't done anything since. The Jags perennially have top 5 picks. And who was the last top 5 pick the Jags have had pan out for them? Justin Blackmon, who is no longer in the NFL at this point. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney has played very well this year for the Texans, but he's not been he's not been the reason why they turned around. And they're not turning around. Brock Osweiler is playing terribly. Having a top 5 pick only generally seems to work when you're picking a franchise quarterback, like an Andrew Luck, who's turned around the Colts. But losing doesn't help a team win in the long term. Personally, in my opinion. I also think that firing a coach, if you fire Lewis, you're going to have to consider that the Bengals are probably changing schemes. That doesn't mean they're going to go 4-3 to 3-4, but that means Dalton is going to have to learn something new. AJ Green is going to have to learn something new. All these guys who've been in this system for so long, all the guys on offense and defense, probably, because if you fire Lewis, you're probably going to fire his staff, or the staff is going to want to leave. You're going to have to change things, and that's going to take time. And how much time do the Bengals really have? People want to talk about a closing window. The window only closes when you close the window, and so trying to turn things around is only going to work if they have a coach who can immediately help this team turn around. And at the end of the day, regardless of how you feel about Marvin Lewis, that's a gamble.
Just to kind of close this segment off on Lewis and his status with the Bengals, you referenced Andy Reid, and I believe his stat as a coach off of buys is something absurd, like 16-2 or 18-2, something awesome. And
yeah, he's the king of the bye week.
Yeah, he's amazing off of buys, and that spells that points to a coach that prepares well off of an bye week and gets his team ready off of a bye week. And that to me points to pretty solid coaching. I will say this. This season could go basically one of 3 ways. Either the Bengals totally just pack it in and don't end up playing very well. They end up making a great run and potentially make the postseason. Or what I think is the worst thing that could happen to them is they still hit this lull, they lose some games, and then they get a late season surge, miss the playoffs, but still have a mediocre record, because then Mike Brown and his staff then have a reason to say, well, hey, this team really is still playing hard for Marvin Lewis. This team is still fighting, and we have these built-in excuses of personnel losses and all of that, and they still made a good effort of it. I think we all want to see them turn it around and make the playoffs, and I think that the talent's there. A lot of things need to change, but I really don't want to see a mediocre season, because then nothing will change. They think that they're still right there, and that things don't need to change. I mean, if they're successful, they don't need to change. But if they're not successful or they're mediocre, then things need to change, because that's been the story of Marvin Lewis in his tenure with the Bengals for the most part. Those are our thoughts on Marvin Lewis and his status with the Bengals beyond 2016. What are your thoughts? You can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can email us at theobinsider@gmail.com. You can check us out on YouTube. We are live and fielding fan questions, by the way. We've already got a couple, so if you have a couple more here, we're gonna get to those in just a second. But if you have a couple last-minute ones, definitely hit us up on our YouTube channel. You can check out our content on SoundCloud as well as YouTube. And we post this show on Cincy Jungle every week, as well as some of the segments we do. So check that out. And, of course, we are also on iTunes, so check us out there. We do have a fan question. By the way, I do want to reference that Marvin Lewis topic was actually one of a fan question we received via Twitter from P. Brown. And thank you for that. It says, it is time to start. It's not really a question. It's more of a statement, but it does play into that. It is time to start looking at a coach. Too good of a team to look like this. Nobody is held accountable. So that's obviously one of the themes we're talking about with Lewis and the Bengals this year, as they sit at 3-5-1. Before we talk about the Bills game, though, and preview that and look ahead, see if the Bengals can get to 4-5-1. We do have another question aside from P. Brown's question, and it was from, let me look this up. I hope I don't butcher this name, Frode Osmundson. And thank you for that. The question is, have the Bengals ever added to a lead this year? It seems once they get the lead, they go completely anemic. Scott, I believe you have some research on this. Before I let you chime in on that, I will say the Bengals do seem to be playing from behind quite a bit this year. And even though the question isn't about how they play with a lead, I will say one of the very frustrating things about Monday night was at the end of the half, where they were completely indecisive on, should we sit on it? Should we go for it? They ran the ball with Giovanni Bernard, and then all of a sudden they decided to throw it, but there wasn't much urgency there, which was, I think, incredibly frustrating for a lot of fans. So at any rate, Scott, do you have some statistics on this? I think you were checking that out. Okay.
Yes, I actually looked this up, and I will give the long answer, which is yes, they have built on a lead, but it's been pretty rare. So going game by game, Giants game, they had a lead 3 times, never built on it. So they did not do it there. Pittsburgh trailed the whole game, did not do it there. Denver had a lead several times, saw the lead get eroded, never built on the lead, so no there. Miami, with all the field goals after they went down 7-0, basically did it 5 times. They were up 10-7, 13-7, 16-7, 19-7, 22-7. So in that one game, they built on the lead quite frequently. Next week, Dallas trailed the whole game, never built on the lead. New England, they led a couple times before New England kind of took over, but they never built on it. Cleveland, they did 3 times. They were up. We went from 14-10 to 21-10, and then they went up from 21-17 to 28-17, then 31-17, and then in Washington game they did it once when they went from 13-10 to 20-10. In the Giants game they did it once when they went from 17-14 to 20-14. So in summary, they've done it 10 times this year, which in 9 games isn't very good, and 5 of those were in one game. So yeah, it does seem like it hasn't happened very often, because in 8 of their 9 games, it's only happened like 5 times. So that's my long answer.
That's good stuff. I appreciate you checking that out and looking that up. Connor, any thoughts on maybe what you attribute that to? Do you think that's scheme? Do you think that's poor play calling? Again, you look at the schedule. They're on the road. Their losses on the road to the Giants. They're tied to Washington, who's a pretty decent team. On the road at Pittsburgh, who, though they've disappointed a little bit, they're still a solid team. And then on the road at New England. I mean, these are tough games too. So do you attribute the road factor, the good teams, poor play calling, all of the above?
I think it stems from the line. And I think it's something I forgot to talk about earlier, and I'm not going to talk about it forever. But with the whole LaFell thing, the reason why these guys aren't making plays is because the offensive line isn't giving Andy Dalton any time. He's not sitting in. I really disagree with the notion that he's sitting back in the pocket looking at his second and third reads. I mean, even the Eifert play was his first read. The Green touchdown was his first read. Almost every single play, it seems like he's throwing to his first read. The only really bad plays we're really seeing in the passing game from the receivers are, we saw obviously 2 drop touchdowns this year so far from Tyler Boyd. LaFell dropped 1 really bad pass on Sunday that would have probably gone for a first down. But generally, it's the fact that the offensive line. I personally, it's just my opinion. I think the offensive line, as soon, it's not just when they have the lead; it's whenever the offensive line has become completely inept. I mean, like you insinuated, Anthony, every single member of the offensive line has taken. The only member of the entire Bengals offensive line who has like exceeded expectations this year to the sugar or to the Bengal fans probably won't like it, but it's Russell Bodine. He's the only guy who has played better than fans have expected him to play this year.
I agree.
Andrew Whitworth has taken a significant step back. Clint Bowling hasn't been terrible, but he's had some bad games. Notably, the Giants game, he did not play well.
Yep.
Bodine hasn't been great, but he's been average, which is a lot better than he's been in years past. Kevin Zeitler has not been the guy who is deserving of this mega extension coming his way, and I mean, and not that I hope that he gets paid. I hope he starts to play well. Like with the whole election, how people are saying, people are voting for Trump to do bad, and the people that respond to that by saying, voting for them to play poorly is like voting for your plane to crash because you want to show everyone how bad the pilot is. No, like we should all still want the season's not lost yet, so at this point you should want the Bengals to play well. And so I hope that everyone turns things around, but these guys haven't been playing to that point. I hope that they do. I hope Zeitler earns his extension. I hope Dre continues to play well, earns his extension. The Bengals need Dre long term because they have no one else playing cornerback anything below average. Adam Jones has not been the guy that the Bengals had hoped he'd be when they signed him to a long-term deal. Darqueze Dennard, we have no idea who he is. Josh Shaw is up and down. And Kivari Russell and William Jackson are both rookies who haven't seen the field, if at all. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just the line isn't out blocking well. And as a result, the Bengals seem reluctant to run the ball, and for good reason, because like we saw before the Browns game, 61% of Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard's rushing yards had come before contact. We see the perfect example of what the line last year. The Bengals line was one of the best in the league, despite the whole notion that Bodine was terrible, which he wasn't great. But the Bengals had a top 3 probably offensive line last year, and you see what you can do with a line like that. Ezekiel Elliott against the Steelers, people are convinced the Steelers tried to not stop him on the last run that he had that went for a touchdown. The Cowboys' offensive line completely negated Pittsburgh's defense, the entire defense. And the week before, there's a frame against the Niners, where I think it was the Niners, it could be someone else, where you literally see every single Niners lineman on the ground before Ezekiel Elliott crosses the line of scrimmage. This is something that is a proven method of success. And I'm not trying to say that the Bengals, trying to draft Ogwehi and Fisher is not a success. We don't know that yet. There's still time for the Bengals to figure that out, and for Ogwehi and Fisher to learn things. And Paul Alexander he's been up and down as a guy. We've seen him develop some great players, Andrew Whitworth, Willie Anderson, but we've seen also some guys who have not developed well. So, and Clint Bowling and Kevin Zeitler have also developed. So it's just going to take time with them, and you just got to hope that things turn around, because Whitworth he's still a guy who deserves to play in the NFL. He's not a guy who doesn't deserve to play in the NFL, but he might not be able to start in the future because he's old and he's not getting any better. And at some point, you need to know what you have in Ogwehi and Fisher, and the Bengals just need to see what they have in this line, and hopefully Westerman could play a potential role on the offensive line, however that is. And I think he's more of an insurance policy in case that leaves, but the line needs to play well, and what turns that around, I don't know. But I mean, we've seen the 2 hottest teams in the NFL right now are the Cowboys and, surprisingly, the Titans. And the Titans' first-round right tackle Taylor Lewan is playing like an All-Pro this year. And as a result, DeMarco Murray, who everyone said was a result of the Cowboys' offensive line, is one of the best running backs in the NFL this year. And that's that speaks to something. This is a league that requires a good offensive line at this point. Andy Dalton doesn't need a lot of time, which is helped the Bengals even win 3 games this year, is because he's been a guy who's been able to get the ball out before he gets mowed down by a bunch of defensive linemen. But something needs to change, and it starts on the line.
Scott, you provided the stats. Any additional areas you're looking at as to why this lead situation is what it is, aside from the offensive line that Connor mentioned?
I think the biggest thing is they just, I think it's a lot of things. I think it's also the defense. The defense doesn't get the ball back without giving up touchdowns. If you look at a lot of the times they have a lead, which I was looking at when I was looking at those games, what happens the very next possession is the other team scoring. So the Bengals aren't getting a chance to build on that lead because they're giving it right back. And that kind of goes to a lot of the issues we've talked about where the defense is staying on the field too long because the offense is having too many 3-and-outs. They just don't seem to be tackling that well. The linebackers are having some of the issues that Connor's talked about. They just don't look like the same defense we've seen the last few years. And if you can't keep the team from scoring, you can't build your lead. You can't keep running like they want to with Hill and Bernard and, kind of drain the clock. Like you look at the games last year, they went out quickly. They scored touchdowns. They would go up by, a couple touchdowns. You'd force their teams to throw the ball so you could play more defense, blitz a little more effectively, get a lot of the interceptions they got, and then just run heavy. And this year they just can't do it. They can't stop the other teams as well. And so you're forced to either play from behind or play back and forth. And they just don't seem comfortable doing that.
I completely agree with both you guys. I think both of those are very valid issues. And unfortunately, it's kind of a chicken or the egg type of thing. Is it which one is the first part of the issue and which part is the second part of the issue? But they're both issues. And it is causing the Bengals to play from behind quite a bit this year, and it's evident by their 3-5-1 record so far this year. Thank you to both Frode and P. Brown for their questions this week. Very good ones, and we appreciate it. Again, you can hit us up on a variety of different means: YouTube, email, Twitter, all that stuff, and submit your questions, and then you can download the content through iTunes, on Cincy Jungle, or SoundCloud, YouTube, all that good stuff. So please do that. Thank you for the questions, guys. We're going to talk about the Bills game a little bit, and then we'll get out of here. The Bengals host the Buffalo Bills, and it's the first time they've been at Paul Brown Stadium since the win against the Browns. And it's a tricky game. The Bills seem to be a team that can win some really good, tough games. They can lose some games that they maybe shouldn't, but they are playing some decent football this year. They have an active quarterback in Tyrod Taylor who can move around, which that sometimes provides problems for the Bengals. Let's talk about this game. Scott, you have one specific matchup area you're looking at this week, and I think you're also going to be making a post on Cincy Jungle about it as well.
Yeah, and that is the running games, basically the Bengals running game and Bills running game. And the one thing I'm kind of looking at on the two teams for the game would be, I want to see, how are they able to run? How well do they do? And part of the reason for that is I just don't think the Bengals are getting a return on investment. We had talked earlier about them using first-round picks on Obuehi and Fisher. We've talked about some of the other players they have. So what I decided to do is look at, okay, what have the Bengals invested in their offensive line as far as draft picks? Because we know they build the teams from within. So how much draft capital have they used on the positions that most affect the running game? So that would be obviously your linemen who are doing the blocking, your Whitworth, Bodine, so forth. And then your running backs, the guys who are running the ball. And then, of course, you could argue, well, the tight end more often than not is going to be in there help blocking. So if you look at those positions, Giovanni Bernard, Jeremy Hill, both second-round picks. Whitworth was a second-round pick. Left guard, center, Bodine and Bowling, both second-round picks. Zeitler was a first-round pick. Obuehi was a first-round pick. And Eifert was a first-round pick. So basically looking at all that, if you take the average of what they've invested, it's 2.1. So basically a second-round pick is what you could argue they're investing as far as draft picks for their offensive running game. And what are they getting for that? Right now, they're getting the 10th ranked running game, 116 yards a game, 4.3 yards a carry, not very impressive. Nothing really good. We talked about the Cowboys, and now we're talking about the Bills. Those are the two teams who are leading the NFL in rushing. The Cowboys investment, 3.1. So basically, every one of those positions are taking a round later. The Bills, not only are they second in the league with 155 yards a game, but they have this insane 5.8 yards a carry. McCoy's the worst of the top three with 5.1 yards a carry. Tyrod Taylor's at 6.7, and the backup running back, Gillislee's at 6.0. So, they're obviously doing something right. And their average investment for those same positions would be 3.4. So like middle of the third. So if you look at the top 5 rushing teams this year, it's interesting what they have on those positions as far as the running back, the line, the people in the running game drops from the Cowboys. It's 3.1. The Bills is 3.4. The Titans are next at 4.1. Raiders at 4.6. Texans at 5.0. So you see that as the teams have spent more in terms of what they are using in the running game, they have seen better results. And then the one outlier is the Bengals, who just have spent, a ton more than everyone else. So everyone else is, I mentioned was like 3 to 5 as far as the average pick for the running game. The Bengals are way, way, way up there, and they're just not getting anything out of it. So we see a huge disconnect where they actually are putting a lot of draft capital into the running game with the running backs, with the linemen. They're definitely spending the picks to try to improve and fix and have a powerful running game. They just aren't seeing the results. So then that brings the big question: well, is it bad picks? Is it because you're grabbing guys like Bodine? Is it because guys like Fisher and Abwehi haven't panned out because you're using second round picks in back-to-back years on a running back? What is it that is causing this issue? Or is it they're not being coached? Are they, is it bad coaching? Is it you're grabbing the wrong players? Whatever it is, there's something definitely is wrong with what they're doing versus what the Bills, and obviously the Bills are padded because Tyrod Taylor runs. But despite that, they obviously seem to be getting much better results. And even if even your second and third stringers can go in there and get a lot of yards, and we talked about earlier the Cowboys, how DeMarco Murray did really well when he was there, and then also Darren McFadden came out of nowhere last year when he was, kind of tossed by the side. He got 1,000 yards, had a good season. So there's a lot to be said for a good offensive line. It seems like the Bengals want to do that. They just aren't able either to develop the players or get the right players or run the right scheme. It just isn't working for them, which is very frustrating because they keep putting their money into it. And it's almost like they always say, you want to retire in the future, so you need to invest in your 401k, your mutual funds, your Roth IRA. And they keep putting like a lot more money than everyone else is, but they're getting like a 1% return. And you see the Cowboys, the Bills, these other teams are getting 10, 15% return. So why are the Bengals not getting there? Is it because they're investing in Enron? What are they doing wrong? They're clearly trying to do the right thing. They just aren't getting the results. And so that's kind of the one thing I'm looking for in the game. Hoping maybe to see these two running teams that are just going in total different directions. Why is it that the Bills were able to run so much better than the Bengals this year?
It's an excellent point. I mean, there's not one Bengals starter on the offensive line that was picked later than the 4th round, and those are Bowling and Bodine were 4th rounders. Whitworth 2nd rounder, as you mentioned, and then you got the 1st rounder Abwehi on the right side, another 1st rounder in Zeitler. So there's a lot of talent there. I think if I can maybe answer one of your rhetorical questions there, Scott, I think maybe one of the issues that the Bengals have on the offensive line is, though they have these high picks there and a lot of talent there, what they seem to value a nastiness and a mean streak and overall strength over good footwork and good technique and maybe even athleticism. Now, Abwehi was known as an athlete. Fisher was known as more of an athletic guy as well. But, I mean, you look to their picks: Andre Smith, road grader. Whitworth, not an excellent athlete, but he's good in pass protection, good in run blocking. Bowling, Mauler. Bodine, Mauler. And, these are guys, maybe they need to start mixing and matching a little bit. It's not bad to have some of those strong road graders maybe on the interior of your line, but maybe you need a little more athleticism outside. I don't know. But that's one thing that I saw. And one thing that frustrates me, Scott, is the 2 games where the Bengals went 1-0-1 against the Browns and the Redskins. They had a combined 423 rushing yards against those teams. Now, granted, those defenses aren't that great, but when you put up 423 rushing yards in 2 games, that's insane. And they basically bailed on the running game against the Giants, even though sometimes it was effective. You saw Jeremy Hill have a nice touchdown run and things like that. So I think both those guys, I think they maybe had 21 combined carries against the Giants. So that's not going to get it done. And obviously with the pass protection issues, a good run game will help negate that. So good stuff from you there, Scott. That's a great point, and obviously something to watch this week. Connor, what are you looking at this week as the Bengals host the Bills at Paul Brown Stadium?
I just want to say one thing in regards to what Scott was saying. I respect his argument. I think the system that he's using to talk about resources teams are using on their lines is a little bit flawed. In the sense that the Cowboys have had, 3 of their 5 starters, Tyron Smith, Travis Frederick, Zach Martin, all of whom coincidentally happen to be the best players at their respective positions, were all first-round picks. Obviously, Doug Free was picked wherever, probably either undrafted or late in the draft a while ago, and then Ronald Leary, who is a backup because undrafted Lyle Collins, who fell completely out of the draft due to character concerns. So I think it's an imperfect system. I don't think I think what Scott said though brought light to the fact that the Bengals really do try to invest in their run game, which is something that's encouraging. I hope that it's a continuity issue and not something that's going to translate into the next year, because I'd love to see what the Bengals line looks like. Who's going to be there? I mean, it's definitely a question that I would love to see answered. And just looking at the Cowboys, because it's what Scott said made me think of the Cowboys. It's so interesting to see it's a little bit unrelated, but their draft history. What has made the Cowboys so good over the past few years? Well, and they haven't even been that very good for that long, but their success has been hitting first round picks. 2010 Des Bryant, 2011 Tyron Smith, 2012 Morris Claiborne. Very slow start to his career, but he's really shown promise this year before he got hurt. He looked like one of the top 10 corners in the NFL before he got hurt, and it looked like what his problem was he was playing on the wrong side of the field, because as soon as they switched him to the left side of the field, the left side for the defense, he immediately improved. Then they have Travis Frederick, best center in the NFL in 2013, Zach Martin, best guard in the NFL probably other than Marshall Yanda in 2014, Byron Jones, the most versatile defensive back in the entire NFL in 2015, and in 2016 you get Ezekiel Elliott. That's just some solid drafting. But then you go to the second round this year, Jalen Smith, who we don't even know if his knee's ever going to be okay. The year before, Randy Gregory, they took a chance, didn't work out. That's the second year in a row they took a chance, didn't work out. The year before, DeMarcus Lawrence, who's been okay, 9 sacks I think in his career, but hasn't been very consistent. If that, Gavin Escobar the year before, tight end out of SDSU, a guy I liked, who I'm not even sure he's on the Cowboys anymore. And then they didn't have a pick in 2012. In 2011, they have Bruce Carter, who I think is now on the Buccaneers. And 2010, Sean Lee, who's a great player, but like the linebacker they just took, Jalen Smith, has had injury issues. It's weird to look at another team and see what they've done, because the Cowboys have hit on like every single first round pick, but every second round pick, it's like they took the chance on the guy that fell out of the first, and it didn't work out for them. And so for the Bengals, I mean, what is their draft strategy? They took Eifert, who was the best. He's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. That worked. But they've had some low draft picks. But like we saw with the Cowboys with Travis Frederick, I mean, you can have a 31st overall pick and eventually potentially land a guy who's the best at his position in the NFL. And so the question just has to be asked. What's going wrong for the Bengals draft picks? And I mean, that's just a discussion for another time. Okay, so heading on to the Bills, the one thing I'll say, their running game has been amazing. Credit Anthony Lynn, their promoted offensive coordinator now, who is having such a great season. The one thing I'll say, they're running amazing, like both of you have been saying. It's going to be interesting to see what happens without center Eric Wood, who Rex Ryan, after he found out the center was hurt, called the best center in the entire NFL. Not that Wood is bad, but he's definitely not the best center, but he's definitely an above average center. And so it will be interesting to see what happens, because the center is a very obviously an integral position of the offensive line, and so to see what happens there will be interesting. I think one thing I would be remiss not to say would be the Bengals offensive line struggles, I think, has really been a lot on miscommunication this year. And the perfect example of that being the play when Jason Pierre-Paul went completely unblocked, and fortunately for the Bengals, only batted down an Andy Dalton pass, but could have easily been a pick six on that play. He was completely unblocked. On another play, Tyler Eifert was on one side of the field and had to pull to the other side of the field to block the defensive end behind the line. I mean, I don't know who that's on. It could be on Bodine, could be on Zampese, could be on Lewis. But the play calling in terms of the protection hasn't been great. And the protection hasn't been great at identifying stunts and different things that defenses are doing. The offense is getting tricked, and so whether that's on the players or the coaching, I'm not going to be the guy to say. But that's been a serious issue. In terms of talent, I think the Bengals still have talent. I think the drafting process, I can't say it's failed them yet until we see that Obuehi is a complete bust, until we see that Jake Fisher doesn't pan out to be the guy he is, until Westerman isn't the guy he is. There's still definitely room for hope.
One area I'll be looking at for this Sunday against the Bills on the Bengals side is their defensive end, or their defensive line, that is. Not only will they, the question is, will they be able to generate consistent pressure, which has been an issue this year? But if they do get in there, will they maintain gap integrity and be able to corral Tyrod Taylor, who can move around and do a lot of different things? Will they be able to contain him and limit any kind of running damage that he could bring them? And obviously the Bengals, we've seen this before. They get in there, they get hands on the quarterback, they grab at him, and somehow they get out of the grasp and make a play with their legs. And that's been part of an issue with the Bengals, not only this year, but kind of really in the last handful of years. I mean, they need to corral Tyrod Taylor they need to pressure him, and then they need to corral him and make sure he doesn't make plays with his legs, because I think if he does, along with the other exciting running backs and other playmakers they have, that could make for a long day for the Bengals, and those agile quarterbacks has been somewhat of an Achilles heel for the Bengals defense over the years. So that's what we're looking at this week. We're going to get out of here, but before we do, Scott, what is your prediction for this game? Score prediction and maybe overall prediction.
I have been very optimistic. I think I've been saying victory every single game, so I don't think my record is very good. I think I'm probably 3-5-1 on the year.
Yeah, there you go.
If I were to make a guess. I was kind of looking at this before we went online.
No, you picked a tie that one game. The Steelers game, was it?
Yeah, I think I picked the wrong, because I figured the field would be crap, so they'd probably be missing some.
So you're
picks.
you're like 3-5, or I don't know what that would make you.
I do remember that I picked the tie, but I picked the wrong game.
That's right.
So I don't think any team's ever tied twice in a year, so I'm not going to go with a tie. The Bills tend to be having a better season. They have a positive point differential. They seem to have more things going for them, which is kind of amazing, figuring that they've their quarterback is a guy that the Ravens basically didn't want. They've lost their best offensive weapon with Sammy Watkins, who they traded up for, who's been out. They had a lot of injuries on defense before the season started, when they were kind of considered before the year over, they're going to have a great defense. You have these good players, good draft picks, and they all get hurt. So despite that, they seem to be doing really well. And this guy came out of nowhere and has 9-10 sacks for them. So they definitely have some things going their way. That all being said, it is a Bengals podcast. I am a Bengals fan. It's not like we're playing, the 49ers from 1988 or something. So I'm going to say we're going to win.
Or the Patriots, or the Broncos, or the Steelers, or every team the Bengals have played this year.
Yeah, it's a game they should. Of course, the last two games are games they should have won. So, it's a winnable game. It's not something where it's automatic. It's not like playing the Browns at home, but it's a winnable game. It's a game they should win. So I'm going to go with the Bengals. I think it's going to be close, and both teams score and give up somewhere about 23 points a game. So I'm going to keep it kind of right around there. So I'm going to say 23-21 Bengals.
23-21 Bengals for Scott. Connor?
Oh, man. I'm going to say I'm definitely taking the Bengals, but it's hard. obviously. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slap a must-win on this game.
Well, I think
If the
everybody's
Bengals
doing
lose
that.
this
Yeah.
game, they're 3-6-1. They would have to win 6 straight and hope the Steelers and the Ravens, both of those teams, don't end up with 10 wins, which is definitely possible. But you still have to win 6 games in a row, including games against the Steelers and the Texans and the 2 against the Ravens. So, slapping a must-win on it. I'm gonna go 24-20 Bengals.
24-20 Bengals for Connor, 23-21 Bengals for Scott. Last week I picked against the Bengals, and unfortunately I was right. But I don't know. This is literally a turning point in the season. Their season's going to they're going to start to turn things around. A fire's been lit under them, and they're going to really go on a run. Or we're going to see a team that is suffering the consequences of a pretty tumultuous offseason and maybe even a hangover from the wild card loss. I don't know. I'll say since they're back at home after a pretty extensive, they traveled to England, they traveled to New York. I'll say that they'll win, and I'm going to be kind of ironic in my score. I'm going to say Bengals 21, Bills 20, which is exactly the score that they lost by this last Monday. So we have a unanimous decision that the Bengals will win. Let's hope that that's the case. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight. Scott, enjoy the rest of your week, and hopefully you get to watch some of the football this Sunday.
One last thing for you. So Bills 3-game losing streak. It's also a must-win for them. They're 4-4, I believe, which means this is a win or go home game for both teams, which is scary. But Bills aren't hot either, so who knows what happens. All
right. Scott, have a good rest of the week. Are you going to be able to watch the game this Sunday?
Probably less than Monday night. We have a Christmas party. I didn't even think of that until I was getting ready for the podcast. And my wife asked me what we were doing on Sunday for the game. Like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And last week, unfortunately, when you get up at 6 a.m., it gets to be a challenge as you when you aren't Connor's age anymore to stay up for these late East Coast games.
I hear you on that one.
9 o'clock.
I hear you on that one. Connor, rest up. Get some soup and nasal spray in you, my friend.
Oh, I will.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. For the Orange and Black Insider, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thanks to my co-hosts Connor Howe and Scott Schultze. Hope you enjoyed this episode and all of the previous other episodes of the Orange and Black Insider. Check us out, as I mentioned, on Cincy Jungle. We post the show. On SoundCloud, you can subscribe to that channel as well as our YouTube channel. All of the content is there, both in audio and video format. We're on iTunes, and check us out there and get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI or via email at the Orange and Black Insider, the OB Insider at gmail.com. Excuse me. Thanks again. Let's get a win this week. Let's right the ship. And hoo day.
Hoo day.